on that. And if you could just look at the camera and clap. Right.
I got some questions.
What do you want to talk about? What would you rather talk about first, art or health? My questions go in health order, but I'm not.
Just do that, and I mean, if it'll come organically out of the.
Yeah, they're not like completely unrelated. Like they're not like the.
Because I mean, yeah, just do that.
Cool.
Be guided by your question, I suppose.
Right, we'll go back to the beginning then. Can you tell me how you felt when you were young, like well before any bipolar was anything that you ever considered or even knew about?
I think generally speaking, well, I mean, when I actually think about my youth, I have generally like warm memories. I think as any child experiences, there's a certain level of being lost in one's imagination and a certain degree of, I guess, confusion. I guess being a child is both. I think it's both a joyful. It's both the most joyful and carefree time of your life, and also the most chaotic in some respects. I think. I mean, it's different. It's strange. It's kind of weird to compare the two. But I mean, I was kind of happy in my childhood. Very much lost in my imagination, I'd say. Very much imaginative child, kind of daydreaming, I suppose, bit head in the clouds. That's what I mean.
What made you happy when you were a child?
I used to be quite into fossil hunting, so kind of hobbies like that. Fossil hunting, reading, used to be good doing puzzles and stuff. A lot of puzzles I remember enjoying. I was quite solitary, really, quite introverted, even then, I think. So yeah, I used to quite enjoy. I mean, I had friends, but I was quite solitary in some respects as well. There's one time actually where I used to be obsessed with dinosaurs and fossil hunting for a while. I used to. My big dream was to set up like a little museum. So I used to collect fossils and stuff. I used to display them in my room and try and get family members to come up and stuff. But, yeah, I mean, I think I was quite weird in some respects, but also just ordinary child, I suppose, in others.
Nice, mate, nice. Can you remember a point in your life when things mentally things start to change a little bit?
Yeah, so that was...
Sorry, one thing I forgot to mention before. When I ask a question, can you try to answer the question in the question? So,
yeah.
With that one, for example, you might say something like, I remember when it started to change, or I remember when things started to feel different, something like that.
Like leading it off with that.
If you don't, it's not the end of the world, but...
Yeah. So yeah, well, things started to change pretty much. This is actually typical onset age, actually, for bipolar. Typically in men is 16 or 17 years old, which is, in my case, was exactly the same. So it was pretty much second year of college, I think, that everything started to unwind a bit, really. I had my first breakthrough episode. That was... So I'm pretty sure it was... Yeah, because I turned 18 in a mental hospital. So I was 17 years old when I had my first breakthrough manic psychosis, which is just basically like a manic episode, which is the high part of the illness. So yeah, everything started to... I mean, the illness manifested itself when I was 17, basically.
Right, and what... Can you... Is there any way of explaining, almost literally, how it felt?
Yeah, there's a few good metaphors which help. There's a Remy, I can't remember, what's the name again? She's basically this author of this book. She has bipolar, she's a psychologist, and it's this it's kind of an analogy that makes sense, I think. She kind of compares it, because bipolar obviously is a condition of a spectrum of moods and extremes of mood. So with the highs, she's compared it almost to like a cocaine high, where you're using a heavy stimulant or whatever, where it's very processing of your thoughts become very fast, They also become quite disjointed, quite loosely connected, grandiose commonly. Some people have religious delusions, not necessarily in all cases, but often. It's just loosely connected, so just very abstract and strange. People are often impulsive. Impulsive is a big factor in mania, so not really thinking before making decisions, making impulsive decisions. That could be anything from gambling to having sex with lots of random people, or thinking bizarre things, having bizarre thought patterns. In some ways, there's hypermania as well, which is almost like a creative kind of constructive high, where it's not gone too far. Spending a lot is another common behaviour that happens in mania. And then obviously you've got the flip side, which is the depression, which is lack of energy, lack of will to really do anything, inability to really just communicate sometimes, even it can get that bad. Obviously suicidal ideation at its extreme as well, which is just having a lot of self-destructive thoughts, I guess.
That thing you mentioned then, that sounds like a golden period. Tell me more about that.
Golden period in terms
of... You're talking about how it hasn't gone too far, and you find yourself
hypermania.
Hypermania, yeah.
So hypermania it's kind of an in-between kind of mood, in between like a normal functioning mood and a mania. Now mania when if you've ever seen someone who's been in a full-blown manic depressive, well, bipolar, I know there's a modern term, bipolar mania, then it's quite easy to tell that they're clearly unraveling in some respect. Whereas hypermania is more of a... People just often describe it as more of a creative or manageable... Well, not manageable because it's still not a good thing, but it's more of like a thing of staying up later. People often think that they benefit creatively and intellectually during that period from the hypermania. Being very productive in general is often a sign of it too. The only danger with it really is that it can often be the precursor to a full-blown manic episode, as it were. Often, anyway, in the psychology of how it works, how it's understood to work, I think.
So it's a bit of a favourite worst nightmare, it's like a sweet spot.
Yeah, it's like I said, people. It's often compared sometimes to like a highs of drugs that you might get like a stimulated high, except that it's not. You don't need drugs. You're not having any kind of artificial chemical. It's your brain that's actually producing that's whatever the chemical imbalance is producing the high instead of taking a drug or whatever. And it can really mania when in certain extremes can actually be really dangerous for not just for yourself but for people as well. In terms of, like I said, people are very impulsive, so someone might drive very fast. That's another common thing, I think. It's not something I don't drive, but yeah.
It's interesting. I never knew about that little.
Yeah, hypermania. Yeah, so because bipolar is a very complex condition, and the other thing as well, to even make it even more complicated, is you've got bipolar 1 and bipolar 2, which is, I don't know how many people know about that, but basically bipolar 1 is classical manic depression, as in fluctuating moods, up and down, and sometimes rapid cycling and sometimes not, whatever. But yeah, it's basically the up and down in extremes of mood. Bipolar 2 is where it's more pronounced on the depressive side, as opposed to the typical up and down kind of cycle. But yeah, those are all diagnostic criteria. It's kind of detail, some of the psychological part. But yeah, so there's basically two forms. There's cyclothymic as well, which is more of that's a newer thing that's coming, I think, but it's not really worth going into, I suppose.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. Can you remember how you felt when you were in a period of things were changing, but you didn't know why or what they were changing to?
Yeah, so when things were changing, it was incredibly surreal, really. I started actually during that point drawing a lot, and I couldn't stop drawing because I had all this just bizarre thoughts really going around my head, but I had to externalise them somehow. I actually made a lot of music during that period as well. I've got an album, Static Waves from Inner Space, which was partially made during that first manic psychosis, I guess. And I was smoking some weed at the time as well, and that, I think, in tandem with the mania, was produced some hallucinations too, or hallucinatory experiences at the very least, which were very strange. Like, just things like being in my room, having, like, I guess what you call sleep paralysis and things like that. So I had an experience where I kind of froze in my bed and was like went out my ceiling, like through a tunnel and stuff. It was very strange. That was a sleep paralysis, but yeah, it was all very weird. And how I felt mostly was just very well. When you don't know what's going on, it's incredibly just confusing, and it's like being stuck in a kind of dream, I suppose, and sometimes also a nightmare. So yeah, mostly confusing and disorientating, I'd say.
At the time, did you talk to people of your own sort of doing, or did people intervene almost?
Yeah, well, it's hard to remember really that much of it in some ways, because it was a long time ago now, and also I think it affects your memory when you have that kind of type of episode. Your perception gets altered in some respects. But I think my mum definitely noticed that something was up, or that my behaviour was changing. There was one time when she picked me up from college, and I basically tried to get out of a moving car, which is not normal behaviour, obviously, because it's pretty risky. And for some reason, I'd put a lot of significance on the colour of the car, I don't know, it was all very, like I said, you have these loosely connected, you kind of have, your mind forms loose connections, which might not necessarily make sense, I suppose, delusional type thinking. So for some reason, the fact that she picked me up in a car had some significance to something.
What was the colour of the car you weren't comfortable with?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I can't. There's no logical explanation for it, because it's not logical. It's just very illogical, kind of delusional thinking, I suppose, at that time. But yeah, that kind of, and so though, I mean, I can't logically explain it, because it's not logical. It's just a result of, like brain going wrong, I suppose, at the time.
How did you react to the diagnosis? Or, sorry, actually, jumping ahead a bit there. How long did the diagnosis take to come?
Well, initially I was diagnosed with cannabis-induced psychosis, which was, I think in a lot of ways, was just a very catch-all diagnosis that they used a bit. In a lot of ways, I don't think smoking weed helps if you've got a predisposition to mental health problems, but I don't think it necessarily causes them. I kind of disagree with that line of thinking that is in some psychiatry. I don't think it causes it. I don't think it helps, but I also don't think it. I think that was a bit of a lazy diagnosis from my first doctor. And then basically it took about 8 months, I think, for 2 years to probably get a diagnosis. When I was first diagnosed as well, I got a diagnosis of schizoaffective. Schizoaffective is basically a mishmash of bipolar and schizophrenia, basically, in terms of like diagnostic criteria. That's over a few years has been kind of changed to bipolar 1, essentially, with some other doctors I've seen. I never really agreed with that initial diagnosis anyway of the schizoaffective, because I just don't think I don't experience the schizophrenic symptoms, so I've never really agreed with that initial diagnosis I got anyway. But yeah, it took about, pretty much, I think I was just on the cusp of 19 or just before 19, so that would have been just over a year.
And when they're talking about bipolar, manic depression, that sort of thing,
yeah.
At the time, did you know much about that, or was that something you had to research and look into, and it was all brand new?
Yeah, mostly I had to look into it. I mean, obviously, I think I knew a little bit at that age of about a few people with bipolar and minor depression, like Vincent Van Gogh, Virginia Woolf, maybe a little bit at that age, but probably not much. Like I probably just had heard the name before. So yeah, I had to do a lot of research actually after that and really figure out what was going on, because it's not a simple condition. And like I've said, with all the different spectrums of mood and the different fluctuations and the way it affects people very differently, it is very complicated condition.
And do you think there's a time period where another individual could diagnose someone else? In like, is there, how long would someone have to spend monitoring you with you for them to ever really know?
And so I mean that's a complicated question actually. Like, as to how it's diagnosed. I mean, really, it's a combination of certain patterns of behaviour and also their regularity, I suppose. Bipolar is often spoken of as being a cyclical condition, in terms of people have typical periods when they will have manias or depressions, and those things will go round and round and round over the course of a year, and the shifts will be more extreme, as it were. So in terms, I think they do have certain diagnostic tests that they can do. The only person who can really obviously diagnose that kind of thing is a psychiatrist. Is it recording?
It's recording, yeah. Sorry, crack on.
Yeah, so the only person who can really diagnose that kind of thing is obviously a psychiatrist, really. But I mean, typical signs of bipolarity is impulsiveness, really, like I said before. Like very frequent mood shifts, which don't always apparently have a reason, I suppose. There's not a logical reason. Delusional thinking sometimes. And that's what I'll say apart from that, really.
Yeah.
It is not an easy disorder to diagnose, and it's still relatively rare, I suppose. It's still quite a rare condition. I think what is it, like 1 in 200 people have got it, or 1 in 400. Well, it's not that rare, but it is rare in terms of, it's not like it's prevalent as something like anxiety or generalized depression or whatever, I suppose.
Is so the complexity of the condition, is that why when you get the diagnosis when you're 18, 19, you sort of struggle to accept it in a way?
It was a very confusing time actually after I got initially diagnosed. I spent like a year basically not really doing much, really. I got like a community support worker. I did do a bit of part-time work, a little bit, at an auctioneer's, but not very long. And I had to adjust to medication, of course, which was difficult. Which comes with its own set of complications and problems. As medications, there's not just one that you can take. You've got lithium, you've got Abilify, you've got lots of different medications which have different side effects. So that was quite an adjustment to make. And yeah, it's. I think everybody who gets that diagnosis has to then start a journey of their own sort. So I found a lot of refuge in art and creativity. And then I also just looked up a lot of documentaries online, I suppose, a lot of YouTube vloggers as well, things like that, just to see what other people's experiences of the disorder were, I suppose, and that helped, I found.
Cool. Just double check that, because I'm paranoid. Lovely.
Yeah. Maybe it's red, it's on, isn't it?
Yeah, this one's conked out for a second. I think when it gets to a certain file size on the card, it has to start again, but it doesn't start again automatically. Anyway, are there any common misconceptions of your condition?
Well, to be honest, like the word manic kind of doesn't have the best connotations. I mean, I think if you said someone manic, their immediate idea is going to be something like the Joker from Batman, like a maniac, I guess. Which is not. It's not really that. It's not. People who are manic aren't maniacs. They're Obviously, sometimes there's a misconception of violence as increased violence, I suppose, whether it be bipolar or schizophrenia, which is a misconception. I think the actual statistics, as far as I'm aware, are that people with bipolar or schizophrenia or those kind of illnesses are more likely to have violence against them as opposed to the other way around, them being violent. I mean, obviously, you have a certain percentile of the population of people with those illnesses who will be violent on occasion, with schizophrenia or bipolar. But they're most of the time are more likely to be victims of crime than actual crime itself. I mean, I'm not saying that it's impossible for, with bipolarity, you can have sometimes impulsiveness, which can lead to doing stupid things. But it's more of just most of the time. I think most of the time, bipolar people are more likely to be putting themselves at risk than other people most of the time, I'd say. So yeah, I mean, yeah.
Why do you think you said about people with bipolar or schizophrenia are more likely to be victims of violence than be committing it? Why is that?
I mean, I suppose if you're a vulnerable person, then you're more open to being taken advantage of. I suppose. I mean, it happens as well. I'm pretty sure with people on the autistic spectrum too. That I'm fairly sure I've heard that, as a thing that Mind and some charities like that have put forward before. So I'm fairly certain I'm not pulling it out of my arse. Obviously you can get severely paranoid schizophrenics who do violent crime occasionally, or who will flip out in that classical way that it might be portrayed in a film or something. But it is a complicated question, but it's like anything else. I think as soon as you kind of stigmatize or scapegoat any group of people who are already vulnerable by virtue of having an illness, then it's not a healthy place to start at, I suppose. You're going to try and destigmatize the illness, make it very objective, and then look at ways of integrating people who have these very complex conditions back into society. I think that's what's not happening enough, I don't think, at the minute. It is happening a bit, but it's not. There's still work to be done, I think.
Nice. That was extremely well put, that. Right. You kind of answered this one already, actually, but we're getting on to the art side of things now.
Yeah.
Unless there's anything else you want to, we can come back to it, but anything
else
you
want to say about do it organically and fine, so.
So you briefly mentioned before when you started painting and drawing, but can you talk us through that time, how it's not something you always did when you were...
No, I mean, I was just thinking, actually, before about what I could say about, when I was younger, how I started drawing. And I just remembered, I was initially drawn to just doodling trees when I was young boy, basically. I was at my grandparents' house, and it's just I remember first being drawn to wanting to draw trees, as well as comic books and stuff like that, copying comics and Sonic the Hedgehog and things like that. But then I kind of felt myself drawn to trees for some reason. I guess because they're complex and they're they're very variant, they're very different. They've all got their own character in a way, I suppose. So that's something I experimented with when I was a young boy, is drawing. And then, I kind of just drifted away from it a bit, though, when I became a teenager. I got more involved in computers and stuff when I was a teenager, I suppose. I was still doing creative things, but it was more like level design and working with games. And then I kind of came back into drawing, especially having it almost obsessive. I kind of, when I first started getting ill as well, I started getting obsessive with just making marks. And when you actually have these kind of experiences of mania or whatever, it's almost like you're breaking through some kind of real living reality, but it's like breaking through to some other world, almost like a magical world in a sense. So if you can find a way of being able to visually portray that, then I found it that if I couldn't get that stuff out, it was almost become, my mental health became unmanageable because I couldn't. Oh, Just randomly took a photograph, I think. Oh, that's about yeah. Ooh.
Oh, you've changed me great then as well.
It's alright, I still got it, I think.
Stay where you are. Oh, battery's a piece of shit.
What was I saying, actually? I was saying about...
You were talking about...
Oh, yeah. Visual representing imaginary...
Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh. It's quite difficult, actually, talking about some of this stuff.
Is it?
It's fine, I don't mind, but it's kind of difficult to retrace it all.
Difficult to retrace or difficult to actually...
Well, yeah, both really, but it is fine.
Just put this...
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, it's fine. I don't mind, but it's not easy to talk about necessarily.
Oh man, you're coming across very articulately. Is that a word?
Articulate, I suppose. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I've done a few of these kind of things before.
Yeah.
So I kind of know how to communicate okay with them.
Can you do another clap for us? Cool. Great.
So I'll carry on.
Yeah,
Let's go.
Thing's still going, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lovely.
Just clap for this so you know to do your editing, I suppose. So yeah, so it was almost like it's having like another layer of reality that you somehow had access to, I suppose. But then if I found if I couldn't express it, or if I felt a compulsion to expel it almost, and I mean that kind of obsession has kind of continued today, I suppose.
And that's how drawing and painting became a big part of your life when it.
Yeah, so it was. I mean, the painting I didn't really get into until post being ill and stuff, really. But drawing certainly was became a kind of it was both a reflective process, a therapeutic process, and just a way of engaging that creative imagination, which, in some senses, is part of the mania. It doesn't define what the mania is, but is part of it, certainly. I mean, if you trace this historically, obviously you've got many, many, many examples in history of people with bipolar or manic depression, as it used to be known, who, or on the mood spectrum of disorders, who were extremely creative, either visual artists or poets. There's a good book on this, actually, Fire of the Mind, which explores the relationship between mood disorder and creativity, like historically. So you've got obviously Vincent van Gogh's the obvious example, with Virginia Woolf, Lord Byron, many other poets, writers, people like this. So I mean, it's not saying that you have to have manic depression to be an artist or something stupid like that, but it's saying that there is certainly a relationship between the higher mood end spectrum of it and creativity in some respect. Although it can be mapped out, I guess.
So what part of the process, when it comes to the art you make, whether it's drawing or painting, what part of the process is it that consumes you? Which bit of it makes you get up and do it? Is it Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think the thing that gets me doing it is, well, like I said, it's kind of a compulsive thing, but that's not really explaining what makes me do it. I mean, what makes me do it is exploration. I need something to wake up every morning. You know, I think everybody needs meaning in their life. For me, meaning comes from seeing what I can create out of nothing, I suppose, essentially. I mean, I think in a way, being an artist is the closest thing that a human being can come to being a god. Because you can just create from scratch out of anything you want, really. I mean, the limit is your imagination. And obviously your ability to some respects, but then you just build on that as time goes on. And I'm far from perfect. I mean, my draftsman, it took me quite a while actually to build up my draftsman skills, and I'm still, I've been doing this for 10 years now, and I'm still learning new things all the time. But yeah, I think it's like I said, I think it's the closest thing you can come to actually being able to create your own world, which is rewarding. I mean, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make lots of money from it and have in that sense, but it's rewarding for its own sake, I suppose.
Got a name for the film there as well. The Closest Thing to God.
yeah. Closest thing to God. That would be grandiose.
What do you think your art says?
That's a really good question. I think it said different things at different points so far, I guess. More recently, it's actually become somewhat darker, I suppose, actually. Like when I first started off, my work tended to be quite bright, abstract, almost jazzy in some respects, in terms of like the colours and just the general, the zing of it, I suppose, the zing of the imagery and the way that things moved around. Whereas now I tend to have kind of almost gone into a bit more of a lot more work's more focused now on the body, but also abstraction within the body, and also a kind of obsession with the macabre in some respects. So yeah, it's starting to go in quite an interesting direction. I still have quite a colourful palette in some respects, but also I think I've gone a bit more. I'm kind of starting to explore that kind of more. My work's nothing like H.R. Geiger, for example, but it's more exploring that kind of territory in terms of very strange alien-looking beings, kind of weird sexual imagery, and all the rest of it. So I'm kind of starting to explore a bit of a stranger realm, I suppose. So if it had any message, I guess it's not. There's no explicit message really per se, but it's more just probing those kind of weird areas of the human mind that we all have. They're all in there somewhere inside us. These kind of weird, murky, strange areas of the human mind. But I mean, obviously, I think it's up to artists in a lot of ways to really delve into those and probe them. I'm quite obsessed with quite a lot of artists who were, whether they be surrealists or the Dadaists or whoever, who were quite obsessed with the dark areas of the human mind. Because I think actually, as a human being, the more that you have a mature relationship with your own dark side, the less likely you are probably of being a prick in some respects. I think the more mature relationship you have to your dark side, the more that you can basically have a kind of control over it, I suppose. That's kind of something I find very interesting in terms of like human psychology, and I think it rings true probably.
That is interesting. And do you think because of the kind of, maybe one of the struggles you've had to be very analytical about your own personality and brain? Do you think that's helped you not be a prick? Do you know what I mean? Because
I can still be a prick. I mean, I think like any human being, I think it's still possible to be that. But yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, I am quite analytical anyway as a person, but I think having gone through a lot of struggle, actually, it does make you more empathetic, I think, in some respects. Everyone's got like a struggle, some description that they're dealing with, whether it be personal, whatever. Like everyone's got something they have to deal with. So having been through an extreme form of that, I think probably makes me more empathetic. Not to every single person ever in every single circumstance, but a lot of them. And if I ever encounter someone who's having some mental health problems, I'll try and help them as much as I can and give them information, signposting and stuff. And I think in some respects, the work that I produce is kind of in that expressionist idea of kind of representing the suffering that all human beings go through, I think, in one way or another. Suffering's universal. It's one thing that all human beings have in common. The difficult part is learning how to deal with it intelligently and come to terms with it, I suppose. I mean, the Buddhists have tried to do that, I suppose. I'm not a Buddhist or anything, but like just thinking of the different ways that people come to terms with what life is, which is very uncertain experience, full of a lot of joy, but also on the flip side a lot of suffering as well. I think that's kind of what a lot of life is about, really, just black and white, and then learning to deal with it, I suppose. I muddled that last part.
Nicely put, mate. I like it. So, last question was, what does your art say?
Yeah.
What does your art mean to you? Does it mean something different than what you wanted to say?
It's kind of what my art means to me is it's an externalization of my soul, I suppose. Really, not all the time. I mean, it's not explicitly always. I'm not always doing things which are explicitly. I mean, most of it's just, I don't know. It's a hard one to explain. I guess most of the things I make are like they're it's like giving life to something, things that exist in me, and then trying to explore what those images and icons mean, I guess. And it's not always apparent to me. And I think if it was apparent to me what everything I've done meant, then I wouldn't necessarily lose interest, but it would be less of a mysterious process. I think painting can only be a mysterious process. It can never be. I don't think it can ever be. It's always going to have that kind of like arcane feeling to it, I suppose, as long as it remains painting or image making in general. There's always going to be that mysterious process going on of where is this stuff actually coming from. I guess it comes from the creative unconscious, but that in a lot of ways is just another way of saying I don't know. I don't know.
So my next question was, is your art a reflection of your mind / thoughts? But what you just said in your last answer was that you think it's more a reflection of your soul.
Well, I mean, I can expand on that thing about the unconscious. Well, obviously, Carl Jung, the psychologist, had that idea around the collective unconscious, which is basically like a repository of the human imagination of symbols, which is often expressed in religion and all the rest of it. And I think it's probably something like that, like where there's this kind of, I don't know, like repository of the imagination which you can tap into. I think any human being can on some level. Crisis and I think often having something like a health problem or mental health thing can actually open the doors to that kind of that realm, if you will. And I think any creative person who's had any degree of having to deal with something which has unleashed those floodgates will be able to understand that idea, I suppose. I think I don't know, I've kind of lost a train of thought, so.
That's good. It's all good, this. We'll be gone, you alright?
Yeah, fine. I just got my headache, it's the tooth.
Oh shit.
No, it's alright, I can carry on, it's just like I've got a bit of headache.
Alright, if you want to start, just...
No, it's fine, honestly it's fine.
Cool. We've got a lot of stuff anyway, so hopefully. Have you ever looked at any of your work and been shocked, scared, or felt like you weren't even involved?
Yeah, many times, and especially now, like I said, it's getting a bit macabre now, some of my work, in terms of the imagery that's coming out. So, it's happened more so with some of the automatic drawings I've done too. And more recently, in the last few years, my work's become more explicitly sexual, I suppose, as well. Sometimes, not all the time, but often. Which I mean, I don't really consider that shocking per se. Representing breasts or whatever, it's just part of this issue. It's part of the human experience. It's not. I don't really think it's a shocking thing. But in terms of creating strange imagery, for sure. I have created some images and I'm just, what the hell's that come from? It's kind of very, he's like humanoid, alien, strange. But then I kind of enjoy that process basically of, and often there's a kind of a mechanistic aspect to some of the figures that I produce as well in terms of them. They look almost like alien, cybernetic, strange things. I mean, a lot of that, like I said, is the Geiger influence coming through, but in a different kind of way to Geiger. Because I'm obviously I can't copy Geiger because he's an amazing draftsman, and working with, and I just don't have the ability to do what he did. But I kind of take some of that, like kind of creating almost like did with the biomechanoids, the kind of weird sexualized imagery, and then kind of abstracting it and turning it into this kind of weird alien looking thing, I suppose. So that's kind of, I mean, that's like an ongoing process. I've never created anything that I would really, I mean, shock as well in art often can be, I think, a bit of a, it can be a bit of a silly game. Like sometimes I think even with like, I mean, obviously you've got like Jake and Dinos Chapman who do a lot of shocking, very shocking imagery, but then I think like the kind of they have all those weird. I don't know if you know the Chapman brothers. They do all these very strange sculptures and things like that. But I think in art, shock for shock's sake. I don't know. I do like shocking art as long as it's. I think as long as the shock has. I don't know. I just think sometimes it's too easy just to shock for the sake of it. I mean, but I don't know. I'm kind of going off on one now. I'm not really sure what the point is I'm trying to make, but yeah, sure. Some things I've done have like not shocked me per se, but I've just had that weird, strange, uncanny feeling to them, I suppose.
What's been your proudest piece of work?
I have a few. So the biggest painting I've done is Information War, which I'm quite proud of. That's 2 by 2 meters. It's residing in Maxfield at the minute. So I was pretty proud of that. That was quite a large, ambitious piece. I was very happy with how it came out as well. I did a mural a while ago, which I don't think's there anymore because they've had to move the studios, but I was quite proud of that. That took a week to do or so.
Where was that?
Second floor studios in London. So they moved premises now, so I don't think it's there anymore. But I've got a video still of that being produced, like a time lapse. It took 17 hours, I think. And then there's a few paintings which I'm pretty proud of. Twinned, I still have a lot of. I like that painting. That's basically there's 2 heads, quite colourful. I just like how the composition came out on that, I suppose. And then. I'm trying to think.
That's cool. We'll hopefully do another shoot where we're with you with your work anyway. So
yeah. So we can talk about it
anyway.
Yeah.
Why do you think you've done so many self-portraits?
I think every artist probably. I think every artist is always analysing themselves, and there is probably somewhat of a narcissistic aspect to it, but I don't really feel narcissistic, really, particularly. I feel more it's just a method of reflection. It's both a few things: exercise, self-reflection, and just trying to figure out where I am at that present moment in time, I suppose. And it's also recording history, not like history, but just personal history.
Yeah,
so
it's the same sort of thing as photography, isn't it? In a way, but it's different.
Well, yeah, it's exactly the same. I mean, and it's kind of. I mean, there was that thing I saw a while ago, actually, which is this was a thing online, but where this guy basically took one of every kind of drug and then did self-portraits and stuff like that, and not obviously I don't do that, but I think it's a very good way of gauging where you're at a certain point in time as to how you perceive yourself. I've done self-portraits which look very, very different in terms of how the line work, how I've expressed myself, distorted my face, whatever. And it's like a visual record across time of self-perception, I suppose, and how you see yourself, which I think is constantly changing anyway, just by virtue of existing in time and space, an aging process and everything. Great
answer that. Again, touched on this a little bit, but What do you think about the relationship between perceived mental health conditions and creativity? What do you think is the link, and what is your opinion on the thought process?
Yeah, so I think there is probably some sort of link, and I don't think that's particularly a controversial view to hold. I don't think that you have to be mentally ill or have to be an artist or vice versa. That's not something that I believe at all. But I think there is certainly a relationship between whether it be melancholia, like having depressive or bipolar or whatever, and a certain form of self-expression. I mean, creativity in general is quite a broad church, really, especially these days as well. So, I mean, obviously, like, we think of traditionally we think of the artist as, having a beret and doing paintings and stuff like that, but the actual definition of what an artist is these days, I think, is much more broad. So, I think it's harder. It's not. I think that link still exists between a certain form of, extreme, having like an extreme deep persona, if you will, in terms of like, which can obviously veer into mental illness sometimes, and being creative, I suppose. But then, and there is, like I said, there's that Fire of the Mind book where that link is explicitly explored between creativity and mood disorder. I mean, historically, it's definitely there, probably in some respect. I don't think it means that you have to be mad to be an artist, because that there's as many examples as you can find of completely bonkers artists, you can find examples of very sane, rational, whatever artists. And I think it's kind of pointless to seek to divide people that way anyway. I mean, obviously, you have to label conditions, categorize them, but then I think, and obviously there is a kind of ideal of the romantic idea of this mad artist who's somehow outside of, creates something which has never been seen before outside of history and all the rest of it. But often, sometimes, that taken to another extreme, we have outsider art, for example. Outsider art being art produced by so-called outsiders. I kind of got a problem with that label, because it's saying that there's insiders. It's suggesting that there's insiders who set all the cultural framework and set things in motion, and it's saying that because someone happens to have a mental illness and produces art, that they're therefore an outsider. That's where I've kind of got a bit of a problem with that outsider art idea in some respects. There's an interesting documentary on it actually on the BBC a while ago, but yeah, I've kind of shot a lot of stuff off there.
Yeah, that was really good. A lot of interesting stuff there.
Yeah.
That the insider line about the perceived insiders who set the rules and such is bollocks. Yeah, I like that.
Because I mean, I kind of. I don't know. I mean, it kind of feels like when someone just. I kind of get an uneasy feeling when someone describes. I mean, I can understand outsider art. I can understand why that label exists on some levels, but then I also think it's kind of just putting people who happen to have a certain, illness or whatever into a box. I think in another way. I don't know. I don't know. I just don't know what to think about that really.
Cool. I read a quote that is on that subject. A common theme with anxiety, depression, or any mental illness is an ever-present void, a thirst for more than what's presently at hand.
Yeah.
Which ties in quite well, doesn't it, with the because it's not so much you look at percentage of artists and it's a shocking amount have got mental health conditions.
Yeah.
Is it not if you took the percentage of people with mental health conditions and took the percentage of them, how much creativity is shown there? It's more that side of things, isn't it? It's not less so much of the influence on the overall structure, more in that world. But like you say, separating people in it, which is a bit counterproductive. Anyway, what unique perspective, if any, do you think your condition has given to your art?
I have developed a ridiculously high tolerance for states of insanity, I suppose, or states of derailment of mind, which other people would not be able to tolerate, I guess. Which might sound strange, but I've somehow managed to remain relatively sane. You know, having experienced hallucinations, experienced quite bizarre states of mind, I suppose. So that's almost a strength in a way. I guess. I mean, like I kind of. I mean, if you look at, I suppose. Look at there's a lot of it in the history of art as well. There's a lot of history of visionary experiences being very important. Like someone like William Blake, for example, he used to see demons and all the rest of it, and which is obviously that relates to the Romantic tradition. And I think, I'm no William Blake, but I kind of like the idea of trying to keep that tradition alive of the visionary and that kind of keeping that tradition alive, I suppose, in British art and in just art in general. And that does mean that sometimes you probably come off like a wild-haired, insane person, but I'm alright with that.
Very nice, mate. That's it. That's everything I've got.
Cheers.
It was pretty sort of health heavy, but like I said, we'll do another when we do visuals. It'll obviously be all about you and your art.
Yeah, it'll be
So
easier for me
that'll
to
be more-
talk about the paintings and
Exactly. Yeah. So this has been heavy on the mental health, but
yeah, it's alright. I'm alright to talk about. I've talked about it a lot. It's just, it's kind of, it's difficult because